Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18 Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome. I am here to share my September 2024 TBR with you. I'm actually filming on September 2nd, which is a little later than I would have preferred. I like to try to get the TBR out before I've actually started reading the books on the list, but it's been a hectic couple of weeks for me. I was out of town for a night over the weekend, and so this is just the first chance I've had to sit down and share these books with you. I'm really excited about this TBR. I'm also, to be honest, a little bit daunted. I feel like it is quite an ambitious one. It's 7 titles and the page count is 2,804. That is on the high end of what I've been reading in terms of pages per month in 2024 so far. It wouldn't be the highest number in terms of pages in a month, but it's up there. And some of the books on the list I think are quite difficult or quite dense. So who knows if I will get through all of these in the month of September. You know, for me, that's not really the point of the TBR in many ways. Making the list is its own joy. So, you know, if I don't get through everything, that's fine. If some of the reading goes into October, that's fine. If some of the books don't get picked up at all and I end up reading something else entirely, that's okay too. But I really like making these lists and I like to share them and I like to hear people's thoughts on any of the books that they have read or that they're interested in. So do share your thoughts in the comments if you have anything you would like to share. I have 4 works of fiction on this list and 3 nonfiction. And in terms of a focus or theme for the month, there's not really an overarching theme. I have tried to prioritize reading books on my physical TBR shelf. For folks who don't know, I have mentioned this a few times before, that in my house I have one shelf that is the spot where all of the unread books live, that are physical copies anyway. So all the books in my house that I haven't read, with the exception of reference books and dictionaries and things, which obviously you don't read cover to cover, all of those live in one specific area. And that shelf is not full right now, but it's getting there. So I did want to make a point of reading some physical books that I own that I haven't read yet, some of which I've had sitting on that shelf for quite a long time. So 5 of the 7 books I have physical copies to show you. The other 2 I don't. I'm reading them for readalongs or book clubs. I haven't decided yet whether I'll read those as physical copies or ebooks. Probably ebooks because they're both fiction and that is how I tend to read fiction, but we'll see. So I'll start with the fiction and then go to the nonfiction afterwards, and I'll timestamp below in terms of the theme of each book. So the first novel that I will mention that I'm reading in September is Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler. This is, of course, the sequel to Parable of the Sower, which I read a couple of months ago. This is a reread for me. I don't reread often, but these books for me are very important, very thought-provoking, contain a lot of wisdom and a lot of food for thought, and so very, very worthy of a reread. I had made one of my reading goals for this year to reread these books because the first book, Parable of the Sower, the setting begins as set in 2024. And the sequel here, Parable of the Talents, starts in 2032. The books were written in the 1990s, so written as near future dystopian texts. And now reading the one set in 2024, it's not near future anymore, right? It's present. And so this is a near future following Parable of the Sower. This is a very challenging book, and I think it's particularly challenging now. I will read a little bit from the description on the back of the book here. Notes that it's a winner of the Nebula Award for Best Novel. In 2032, Lauren Olamina has survived the destruction of her home and family and created a peaceful community in Northern California based on her newly founded faith, Earthseed. The fledgling group provides refuge for outcasts facing persecution after the election of an ultra-conservative president who vows to, quote, make America great again. In those words. In an increasingly divided and dangerous nation, Lauren's subversive colony, a minority religious faction led by a Black woman, becomes a target for President Jarrett's reign of terror and oppression. Octavia Butler is one of my absolute favorite authors of all time. Octavia Butler's Lilith's Brood trilogy may be my favorite book of all time. These are up there as well. They're so intense and so important. And I am happy to be reading this again. I needed a break after reading Parable of the Sower in July. So I took August as a breather to kind of digest and think and reflect. And I'm returning to the series now in September. The second novel that I have to share with you has been on my shelf to read for quite some time. And I think that reading this in the same month as reading Parable of the Talents is going to be a particular sort of intense. And that book is Jalgren by Samuel Delany. This is also a nearish future United States set science fictional novel. This one is a science fictional novel. And it is not one I've read before. I have read Samuel Delany before. I've read Samuel Delany both as a fiction author and as a autobiographer. One of his autobiographical books that I have read is one of my favorite autobiographies of all time. This one is, again, fiction, science fiction. Just reading a bit from the back here. Bologna is a city at the dead center of the United States. Something has happened there. The population has fled. Madmen and criminals wander the streets. Strange portents appear in the cloud-covered sky. Into this disaster zone comes a young man, poet, lover, and adventurer, known only as the Kid. Tackling questions of race, gender, and sexuality, Jalgren is a literary marvel and groundbreaking work of American magical realism. I know that this book contains a fair amount of quite challenging content and is also considered to be, by many, quite a challenging read in terms of its style. I understand it to be quite almost kind of stream of consciousness in terms of how it is written. I'm very curious about this book. I've been wanting to read this for a very long time. It is over 800 pages long. 800 pages? It's 799 pages. No, it's not. It's 801. It's 801 pages long. This will be the longest novel that I have read this year. So I anticipate this being a lot, but I am really excited to finally take the time to engage with this book, and I'm sure that I will have a lot to say about it once I'm finished. I will also be reading in September Lone Women by Victor Laval. This is a read-along being hosted by three girls of Three Girls, One Deck. This is Three Girls, One Book. They have done one read-along before with Nettle and Bone, and this is the next one, Lone Women by Victor Laval. This is a horror novel. Horror is not my go-to genre, but I do enjoy it. I choose my horror novels carefully. And this is one that I have had interest in reading for quite some time. I have read one other book by Victor Laval before, and I thought it was really good. So I'm really interested to engage with this one. It is set in 1915 in the United States. And the book description reads briefly, Adelaide Henry carries an enormous steamer trunk with her wherever she goes. It's locked at all times because when the trunk opens, people around Adelaide start to disappear. The year is 1915 and Adelaide is in trouble. Her secret sin killed her parents, forcing her to flee California in a hellfire rush and make her way to Montana as a homesteader. Dragging the trunk with her at every stop, she will become one of the lone women, taking advantage of the government's offer of free land for those who can tame it, except that Adelaide isn't alone, and the secret she's tried so desperately to lock away might be the one thing that will help her survive the harsh territory. There is a theme here in my September fiction that I think is going to run through Parable of the Talents, Jalgren, and Lone Women in different ways. They're all set in the United States. They all have, I think, some really challenging elements to them. I think that they will. The other two are not described as horror. Lone Women is a horror novel, but they definitely have unsettling elements to them. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion of Lone Women that Three Girls will be facilitating later on in the month. I had a really good time chatting in the YouTube chat at the last one, and so what better time than this to read that one. The last novel I will be reading is a brand new release, released in August, at least here in Canada, I think September in some other places, and that's The Sun Forge by Sasha Stronach. This is a sequel to a novel called The Dawn Hounds, and I'll be reading this with Katie Flowers, or Katie One More Time, in her Blossom Book Club. And this is a Maori-inspired queer fantasy series. The description of The Sun Forge states that with the events of the first book, The Dawn Hound's over, Sun Forge reopens on a city in flames where a magic-wielding pirate crew uncovers an age-old fight between the gods that threaten their world. So a fantasy novel that I'm very much looking forward to reading. I really, really liked The Dawn Hounds. It's very complex, very queer fantasy that I really enjoyed talking about with the Blossom Book Club because it was a pick for that book club quite a long time ago now, or what feels like a long time ago, maybe a year ago. And so this is the first time that we'll be reading a sequel together, which is exciting. Obviously, with a book club, it's a bit challenging to pick a sequel. You would have to, I think, pick a sequel for something that you all had already read together before, or at least had the chance to if you wanted to participate. And so I'm really excited about this one. I'm really hoping, I haven't bought this book yet, I'm really hoping that there's some kind of recap of the first book in the second book. I might go back and reread the last couple of chapters of The Dawn Hounds just to get myself back in that world and reacquainted with what was happening at the end of the first novel, because it is this kind of fantasy with a lot of moving parts and a lot of world building and a lot of characters that, you know, going so long between reading installments, it can be a bit challenging to get back in. I think that it wouldn't be if you were reading them all kind of right in a row, but when you're reading them as new releases, obviously that's not the case. So I will need to go back and refamiliarize for sure. Nonfiction, I have 3 books on my list that I plan to read in September, in no particular order. I would like to read Your Tarot Toolkit by Tom Benjamin. This is something that I've had on my shelf for a few months, but I just haven't gotten to yet. I did read his first book, Tarot on Earth. I really enjoyed it. This book as well has a kind of workbook component with activities and charts to fill in. My understanding is that this one leans maybe more towards working with tarot decks that are fully illustrated, whereas Tarot on Earth, I think, very much lean towards more pip style decks. I think you could complete the exercises with either, but that in my mind is how I'm thinking about these different decks. So I've had a skim through this to look at some of the different activities, but I haven't started. I I am excited for this. I think that Tom Benjamin is very good at coming up with interesting activities to do with tarot that generate good discussion in the context of workshops and classes, and I think they get you thinking in new ways, even if you're someone with a lot of experience with tarot already. And, I'm not sure whether this will be something that I will end up suggesting for beginners. It is pitched in terms of the description on the back of the book. This is described as crafted for intermediate and advanced readers. And I think that that's rare. There aren't a ton of books that I think that really overtly are oriented in that way. There's so many books that are oriented towards beginners. So I'm interested to see how that kind of manifests is such a weird word. Like how that is in practice to work with this book. I am really excited, and I will, I think, review this book when I'm done, and I will share my thoughts then. Very excited. I plan to read in September Dancing on Our Turtle's Back, Stories of Anishinaabeg Recreation, Resurgence, and a New Emergence by Leanne Batasamosuk Simpson. I have read works by this author before and really appreciated them and learned a lot. And this is one of her earlier books. This is published in 2011, and I am very much looking forward to reading this book. So just briefly from the back of the book, many promote reconciliation as a new way for Canada to relate to Indigenous peoples. In Dancing on Our Turtle's Back, Stories of Anishinaabeg Recreation, Resurgence, and a New Emergence, writer, editor, and educator Leanne Batasamosuk Simpson asserts reconciliation must be grounded in political resurgence and must support the regeneration of Indigenous languages, oral cultures, and traditions of governance. And I'm just really looking forward to reading this book. I think that Leanne Batasamosuk Simpson is an extraordinary author. I can't recommend her work enough. And I live on Anishinaabe territory. So this is, particularly, I think, speaking to a context that I live in as a settler here. And so is important to think about and to engage with texts like this. So I bought this some time ago now. It's been on my shelf, and I want to prioritize reading it this month. Last on the list for September is another lengthy one. And that is Blood and Mistletoe, The History of the Druids in Britain by Ronald Hutton. This is the book that I have chosen for the third quarter of the readathon Historathon. Historathon is a non-fiction history readathon that spans the whole year, with the year broken up into 4 3-month quarters, each of which has been given a time frame. So the idea is to read at least one book focused on the history of that time frame in each quarter. And it's totally open in terms of geography and theme. You can read whatever you want. The idea is just to read non-fiction history from a range of different time periods. So the third quarter is books focused on the time period of 1500 to 1820. This will span that whole time period plus some before and some after. The reason I'm choosing this for quarter 3 specifically is because the Druid revival really picked up in the early 1700s. And the Druid revival is what is in many ways the core influence of the Ancient Order of Druids in America, which is the order that I belong to, and numerous other revival Druid orders. So that is going to be given a lot of emphasis in this book. This book is not primarily focused on ideas about ancient Druids and the construction of Stonehenge and things like this, really that gets covered in the first chapter. There's not all that much to go on. So the bulk of this book, I think, will focus in that kind of 1700s time span and after. And so I've chosen it for quarter 3 of Historathon. Ronald Hutton is a academic historian. He is not a practicing Druid. He certainly knows and counts as friends folks who are. And, you know, I think will write a really good book about Druids. He has another book about Druids as well, and they're both based on the same research as I understand it, but this is kind of the larger and perhaps more scholarly of the two. So it's the one that I went for. It's a big one. There are some pictures inside, and probably a good 100 pages of this is actually footnotes or endnotes rather. Endnotes and bibliography, which I love. It's well indexed, which I love. You can see there's a bookmark in it. I have actually started it. I'm very early in, but I'm looking forward to learning about the history, not just the history of Druidry and the history of Druids, but the history of the ways in which the figure of the Druid has been represented in literature and in culture, throughout the centuries, which is really, I think, what this book is ultimately going to be about. So that is the last book for me for September 2024. It is an intense list. I'm really excited about this TBR, though. If you've read any of these books, if you're interested in any of these books, do let me know. I would love to hear about what you have thought about any of them. And if you're reading anything particularly exciting that you're really looking forward to for September, do let me know that in the comments as well. I hope that some folks will be joining in with 3 Girls, 1 Book, so that we can chat about that in the live chat. I will look forward to sharing my thoughts on these books with you in about a month's time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.